All right, Algebra students, welcome to 8-8, the last section here for Chapter 8. So the goal of today is to learn one more method of factoring, so factor by grouping. Okay, so I'd like to start off with this getting ready problem. Read it, try it, pause the video, and then check your work. So go ahead and pause it. All right, assuming that you've paused the video here, it says you got three boxes here. You want box A plus box B to equal box C. Let me do that in yellow here. So you want these two boxes together to equal box C. Okay, and you're given some dimensions. So assuming you've read the problem there, how can you figure this out? Well, the first thing you got to do is you have to figure out the volume of box A. Okay, so we'll say the volume of A is going to be length times width times height. So the volume of box A is going to be 3x plus 7 times x times x. Okay, and the volume of box B, we'll come back and simplify that later. The volume of box B is going to be x times x plus 3 times x plus 3, which is going to be x plus 3 squared. I can do it like that. Okay, so there's a couple different ways you can do this, but I'm just going to simplify x and x to be x squared. So I'll just simplify that down here to be x squared. And then I have 3x plus 7 here. So if I simplify that down, and then I distribute this x squared here, the simplest way to represent this would be x squared times x is 3x cubed. And x squared times 7 is 7x squared. Okay, so this is the best way to represent the volume of box A. Okay, and notice that it's cubed. So, usually volume is cubed. So that's cubed right there. The volume of box B, we can kind of take a shortcut here. If you remember, this is a perfect square trinomial. So if I simplify this, this is going to be x squared plus 6x plus 9 right there.
What are you doing?
Okay, I'm doing notes for my kids. Can you go in the other room and go play with Brielle? Okay, and then I have the volume of
Dad,
box B.
phone.
Tyler, Daddy's recording a video. Okay, go in the other room, bud. Daddy's, thank you. So if I have x times x squared is going to be x cubed. X times 6x is 6x squared. And x times 9 is going to be 9x. So that would be the volume of box B. Okay, so now that we got the volume of box A and box B, let's combine these two. So we have to combine like terms. Okay, so if I combine these, got a lot of chapter 8 in this problem. If I combine these, I have A plus B is going to equal, shrink it down even more and move it over. It's going to be 3x cubed plus x cubed is going to give me 4x cubed. And then I have 7x squared plus 6x squared is 13x squared. And then over here I have plus 9x. Plus 9x. Okay, and it says volume C is going to equal this. So the volume of C is going to equal this. What can the dimensions be? Well, one of the dimensions is x. So if I factor out that x, I'm going to be left with 4x squared. I just take the x, one of these x's right out of here, plus 13x plus 9. Okay, and I still don't know the dimensions. Maybe this is going to be the length, or the, what does this say it is? This could be the length. And now I need to find the width and the height. So the width and the height would be in here in the purple. Okay, so we learned how to do that. We have to factor that using the x method with a horizontal line there, or star method, whatever you call it. So I have 4 times 9 is going to be 36. And I have 13 right there. 4x goes here, 4x goes here. What multiplies to 36 and adds to 13? It's going to be 4 and 9. 4 times 9 is 36. 4 plus 9 is 13. And then I could do some reducing. So this is going to reduce to just x plus 1. And this is going to be 4x plus 9. So my other dimensions here, I'll erase this. This could be x, and then I have x plus 1 and 4x plus 9 right there in purple. Okay, so this might be x plus 1. And then I might get 4x plus 9 over here, which is probably what it's going to be. So the height might be 4x plus 9. All right, a lot to do in that problem. So hopefully you were able to get part of the way there or all the way there. If you got all the way there, outstanding. So factoring by grouping. When would you factor by grouping? Well, you'd factor by grouping when you have 4 terms, or usually it's a cube. So those are the 2 things you should be looking out for when you're factoring by grouping. So you have a cube right there, and you also have a polynomial with 4 terms. It's not a trinomial. If it was a trinomial and it said factor, then you would just use the x method. Okay, but if it is 4 terms, you can't use the x method. You got to use something else. So what are we going to do here? Well, we're going to group these together. So it's called grouping because we're going to group them together. So I have this group right here in orange, and this group right here in yellow, and I'm going to group them together with parentheses. And I'm going to group this together over here with parentheses. And then after I group them together, then I'm going to factor. Okay, so what do these 2 terms in orange have in common? They have a 3n squared. So right here I can factor out 3n squared. So just within the orange I factor out 3n squared and I'm left with n minus 4. Over here I can factor out a 2. So if I factor out a 2, I'd be left with n minus 4. Okay, so this in yellow, these terms are all equivalent in yellow, and these in orange are all equivalent right here. And then I notice something. I have n minus 4 and n minus 4. Something kind of strange happens here. When I factor it out and I have 2 terms left that are the same terms in parentheses, I can rewrite this as 3n squared plus 2 times n minus 4. Why can I do that? Well, 3n squared is being distributed to n and 4, so that would be distributed here. And 2 is being distributed to n minus 4, so that would be distributed there. Okay, so it kind of all works out. Might take you a little while to make those connections, but that's what it would be. And let's just quickly prove it here. Let's prove that 3n squared plus 2 times n minus 4 gets me back to my original problem. So 3n squared times 3n squared, my original problem's right here, is going to be 3n cubed, which it is. And then I get minus 8. That works out right here. Here I get 2n. That's right there. And right here I get negative 12n squared, which is right there. So I know that these are the correct way to factor it. Okay, let's move on to example 2 here. So what I want you to do is I want you to use the same method and see if you can factor this by grouping here. Okay, and it also says before factoring by grouping, you may need to factor out a greatest common factor. So we learned how to do that. So you might want to try to do that first. So this one's kind of got 2 steps. So see if you can factor out the greatest common factor first, and then factor by grouping. All right, assuming that you've paused it, let's give it a try. So I noticed they all have a q in common. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to factor out that q before I do anything else. So I'm going to factor out the q, and I'm going to rewrite this as 4q cubed minus 8q squared plus 12q minus 24. So what I did was this part here. Factor out the greatest common factor first. They all had a q in common. And then from there, I'm going to group things together. So I'm going to group these two things together. Okay, we're going to keep it somewhat simple here. If you just factor the first two and the last two together, group those together, that'll work out. There's more complicated problems where you might have to rearrange it first and then factor by grouping, but we're not going to get into any of those. Khan Academy might have a few of those, so heads up there. So I've got this q hanging out. And then I'm going to factor out a 4q squared here. So within this, I'm going to factor out a 4, and I got double parentheses here, 4q squared. And I'm going to be left with q minus 2. All right, so I factored out that 4q squared, and then I'm left with 4q squared times q minus 2. Okay, in orange over here, I'm going to factor out a 12. So when I factor out a 12, and it's going to be a positive 12, so I'm going to put positive 12, I'm left with q minus 2. Notice that I have q minus 2 and q minus 2. Okay, I'll shrink this up. And my last step is just to rewrite this. So I'm going to rewrite it as q factored out. And I have 4q squared plus 12, and then q minus 2. Okay, so I got the q minus 2 right there. All right, last one. Try this one on your own. Try got it number 2. So pause it. Okay, assuming that you paused it. We have a couple things to do on this one. First of all, they all have an h in common. So I can factor out that h right away. So I'm going to factor out the h. Okay, when I do that, I'm left with 6h cubed plus 9h squared plus 12h plus 18. From there, I'm going to factor by grouping here. I'm going to group these two together. I'm going to group these two together. And the h is still hanging out. I can factor out a 3h squared. So I'll factor out 3h squared. And I guess we didn't need double parentheses up there, but we'll factor out a 3h squared. And what's left is going to be 2h plus 3. Over here, I can factor out a 6. So I'm going to factor out a positive 6. So I did this in yellow here. In orange, I'm going to factor out a positive 6. And I'm left with 2h plus 3. So this is kind of a checkpoint too. If you get the same thing that you factored out, the same thing remaining in parentheses, you know you did it correctly. So the last thing is, I'm going to rewrite this. So I had this h that I factored out. And then I have 3h squared plus 6. So I combine these two things and write them together because they're both being multiplied by 2h plus 3. Okay? So where do I get all that from? Oops, don't need to highlight that one. I started out here and then I had to really factor twice. I had to factor out the greatest common factor, and then I had to factor by grouping. All right, if you have questions about that one, which I'm sure some of you will, we can go over that in the Zoom meeting before our test. Have a good week, guys.